remember from when we were talking about Rem Koolhaas earlier, we mentioned that he wrote the book Delirious New York while he was on a fellowship at the Institute for Architecture and Urban Studies in New York. And I mentioned that this was an organization Peter Eisenman had been very central in. There were two other figures that were very central in establishing the Institute for Architecture and Urban Studies. One of them was Kenneth Frampton, and the other was Stanford Anderson. And Kenneth Frampton, of course, is the author of this article on critical regionalism that we're reading this week. The IAUS was an amazing think tank of architectural ideas in the latter part of the 20th century and really well into the 21st century. I'm sorry to say it's defunct now, but for a very long time it published a journal called Oppositions. They were all this bright orange color, and they were just full of amazing ideas and philosophies and theories about architecture. And that was really just fertile ground for sowing lots of directions that design and architecture have taken since then. So really today we're looking at this article by Kenneth Frampton, a major figure in architectural history and architectural theory, and someone that has had a phenomenal impact, not as a designer, but as a theorist. Kenneth Frampton's very clear about his organization of this article on critical regionalism. He has these 10 points he wants to make. And certainly it's worth reading all of those and understanding all of those, and those are topics for discussion in class. But as you read this article, I'd like for you to focus on 3 areas in particular that I definitely want us to concentrate on as we're having discussion in class. And so I'd like to outline those prior to your reading so that you can kind of be thinking about them and then come to class totally prepared with your own ideas about how you react to those. So the first topic has to do with his points number 2 and 3. In point number 2, he talks about the fact that although modernism has often been boiled down to this simplistic version of this is modern architecture, the truth is, when it was in its heyday, it was an incredibly diverse set of expressions, and often diverse because of reactions to different locales. So he highlights a number of very important modern architects that he thinks of as expressing modernism in the context of their region. So that would be people like, Luis Barragan, that we're going to look at in the next talk. But also, figures in Spain and figures in South America and figures, all over the world. And then his point number 3 kind of follows up from that, talking about these schools of thought, these regions where there are a number of architects practicing together and creating what he calls a kind of myth or an ethos of what is an appropriate kind of modernism in this place. And he talks about Southern California and people like Gregory Ain and Harwell Hamilton Harris and Rafael Soriano, all of whom were friends and were working in Southern California and were interested in modernism, but a particular kind of modernism that seemed right for that place. And they were interacting not just with other architects, but also with filmmakers, with artists, with musicians, with other people who are also thinking about what is LA, what is Southern California, what does this place have to offer the rest of the world. So we're going to be talking about this idea of alternate modernisms that are specific to a place and that come out of a kind of group of people thinking about that place and creating a school of thought about that place. So that's one thing to think about. The second thing I'd like for you to concentrate on really combines 4 of these points that Frampton talks about, and I think they're related. One is point number 4, where he talks about information and experience, and He says, we have begun to lose our capacity for distinguishing between information and experience, not only in architecture, but everywhere else as well. He goes on to say, we are inclined, even urged, to take the representation for the real thing, and vice versa. Have we lost the ability to really see physical, real, tangible things as very different from the representation of those things? He goes on to say, we often read buildings as picturesque images of structures rather than opening ourselves to direct experience of their corporeal form. So he's advocating not thinking of buildings as pictures, as images, as ephemera, but rather they're real, genuine things to be experienced in 3 dimensions and in a complete sensorial way. I think that's very related to his point number 7, where he talks about the importance of architectonics and how we should not be thinking about things being scenographic. And again, that's that sort of superficial, just image experience of architecture. Scenographic is just an image, but really we should be thinking of it being architectonic. How is it performing in real space with things like gravity and so on? So he says, architecture should display the way in which the artifice interacts with nature, not only in terms of gravity, but also in terms of its durability with regard to the agencies of climate and time. So how does a building weather? How does a building demonstrate that it's standing up against the wind and the rain and the sun and gravity? And how do those things make it architectonic, really visceral, as opposed to scenographic, something that's more superficial? I think number 4 and number 7 are very related also to point number 8, which is about artificial versus natural. And this is a very different point of view, let's say, than Rem Koolhaas, who felt like the man-made was superior to the natural. Frampton's saying quite a different thing. He says, more than any other art form, building and architecture have an interactive relationship with nature. Nature is not only topography and site, but also climate and light, to which architecture is ultimately responsive to a far greater degree than any other art. So we need to think of the way architecture is generated as an outgrowth of natural forms and spaces and elemental creations. So we need to be thinking of it growing out of nature and not as something that is fabricated and plopped into nature. Again, I think 4, 7, and 8 are related to point number 9, which is that architecture should be tactile as well as visual. Frampton says, in fact, architecture possesses a marked capacity for being experienced by the entire sensorium. That is to say, senses other than the optic nerve are involved in experiencing architecture. So especially the sense of touch, the sense of smell, how do these things get translated into architecture as well, so that it becomes really something all of our senses can respond to? So I think these 4 things clustered together are about a kind of very visceral experience of architecture, something that is very elemental and really speaks to the deepest kind of human experience, and not just a kind of visual, ephemeral image of a building. So think about that. Get your thoughts organized to talk about it in class. Then the third thing I'd like for us to talk about in class is his last point, which is his summation. But it's kind of an argument that on the one hand, there's this kind of historicism or just borrowing elements of architecture from prior architecture. And on the other hand, there's this notion of the avant-garde, or inventing something completely new. And Frampton is interested in something that's in the middle between those, that merges those things together. And in that sense, he wants to find an architecture that he says is an architecture of place, and that really combines the past of a place and the future of a place and the now of a place, and really responds to all of those things. So in the next talk, we're going to elaborate on those three different areas a little bit, and then so read your article, think about it, look at that next talk, and then come to class completely prepared with your own ideas and responses and reactions to all of these ideas. Okay, thanks a lot. See ya.